stage. But before I hand over the stage to him, I have one question. How many of you, I have a challenge for you. How many of you can say this word 3 times without making a mistake? Floxy, nausea, nihilipilification. Did I say that right?
Very good.
Okay. Alright, so, who can say this word 3 times? Don't ask me to say that again. I practiced all night yesterday. And the person who gets it right gets a chance to take a selfie with Dr. Tharoor. Put up your hands. Yes. Please give it a try. 3 times. Use the mic, please.
Floxenosine hilipilification.
Okay.
Floxenosine hilipilification. Floxenosine hilipilification.
Is that right?
It's right. It's just that the emphasis is slightly off. In other words, it's not nicini. It's floxy, nosi, nihilipilification. Nihil is a Latin for 0. So since the word means the act of estimating something as worthless, so you should not say floxy nosini hilipilification. You should say floxy nosi nihilipilification as he did. But you're absolutely right, you didn't get it wrong, so well done.
So, what's your name?
Devi.
So Devi gets a chance to take a selfie after
If she wants one, poor thing, why don't you
Yeah,
assume-
sure, sir.
Okay, we'll do that at the end of the
after
discussion.
the session.
Today we are privileged to have Dr. Shashi Tharoor, who graciously agreed to deliver the keynote address for WINGS 2019. Currently a second-term Lok Sabha MP representing the Trivandrum constituency and chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee on External Affairs, he has previously served as the Minister of State for Human Resource Development and Minister of State for External Affairs in the Government of India. An author, politician and former international civil servant, Dr. Shashi Tharoor has the rare distinction of making a mark in all the fields he has touched upon. It is a great honor to have you with us today, sir.
Thank you very much.
May I please request you to deliver the keynote address?
Thank you for those kind words of introduction, and good morning to everyone, good afternoon. I'm a bit late, but that's the life of an MP in his constituency. One doesn't quite control one's schedule, but I'm glad to be here with you to help inaugurate the WINGS program of the Project Management Institute's Kerala Chapter. It's a very interesting set of issues we're already discussing, and just listening to my friend Rishikesh Nair laying out some of his thoughts gives me the launch pad for what I would actually want to say. Because he's absolutely right that one of the things that all of you have been living with is the dizzying speed of change and transformation in the world of work, and thanks to the world of technology. Change was much slower. Okay, so my parents or grandparents started off with slate and chalk. My generation was pen and paper, initially pencil and paper, then pen and paper. Your generation's probably already in school and certainly in college been exposed to the computer keyboard and the mouse. And yet, as Rishikesh is pointing out, that's no longer the whole story. Because within the business of modern computer technology, the transformations and change have been accelerating with such bewildering rapidity that the world is unrecognizable. Now, for someone like me who graduated into a world where there were no computers, or no personal computers anyway, and no mobile phones and so on, the contrast between the world that I had to adjust to as a young adult, and for all of you born taking those things for granted because you see them around you all the time, you may feel that my adjustment would have been greater than yours. But in yours, that speed of change is truly transformative. One of the things that I was always struck by was how throughout my childhood and early experience, we thought of computers as essentially inferior to human beings. You know, when I was 13 years old, NASA sent Apollo 11 to the moon, and Neil Armstrong landed on the moon and said, a small step for man, a giant leap for mankind, immortal words, etc. Well, to guide his spaceship to the moon, they had a room larger than this auditorium, filled from floor to ceiling and from wall to wall with computers. And those computers guided the Apollo 11 mission. Of course, there was no such thing as personal computers. These are amongst the few institutions that actually had computing power available to them for such things. Well, today, the entire computing power in that huge room at NASA that put a man on the moon is exceeded by the computing power of one mobile phone. And that is the degree of change we've got to wrap our minds around. That's how quickly things have changed. Rishikesh gave you some very specific terminology for the kinds of things that are not dominant, but very clearly for the layperson, it's artificial intelligence and machine learning, of which blockchain and everything else are manifestations, it seems to me, that have absolutely put this challenge beyond what we've been used to. When I was a kid, not just a kid, when I was a young adult, even heading to my middle age, computers could never defeat the best chess players. Initially, when computers were first programmed, IBM Watson was first programmed to play chess, a high school student could defeat the computer. Subsequently, with the advent of machine learning, with the advent of computing speed accelerating to a point where billions of computations and permutations could be calculated for every potential chess move, the human advantage, which was a combination of instinct, strategy, and an ability to think many steps down the road, that got overtaken by the computer's advantage. The early computers could only think logically one step at a time. The later computers not only could do far more calculations and come up with far more possibilities and then choose the optimum one amongst them, but of course they kept learning from their own experiences. And so I think it was about the turn of the millennium that Garry Kasparov was the last world champion to defeat a computer at chess. Thereafter, nobody has been better than a computer program at chess, because the computer programs have benefited so much from artificial intelligence, from repeated machine learning of these exercises of chess, that now they are greater than any human mind can compete with. Now that's, for me, something unimaginable. I would never have thought that such a thing would happen. One thought of the computer as a tool, as an instrument. Clearly now, the computer invented by human beings, initially programmed by human beings, has been able to exceed the capacity of its maker. Is this going to be a Frankenstein's monster? You remember the famous story by Mary Shelley of Dr. Frankenstein, who created a monster, expecting to do his bidding, but the monster escaped his control and went on a rampage around the world. This kind of phenomenon seems to me to be one of the risks, that not only can machine learning and artificial intelligence exceed the capacities of any human competition, but they can get to a point where they could develop a certain autonomous will of their own. Ally that to robotics, and you actually have some sort of 1970s, 80s movie horror film story where some sort of cyberborg programmed through artificial intelligence runs amok and tries to take over the world. So these are, I know, in the realm of science fiction so far, but they're within the realm of the possible. What are the implications for the world of work? Because all of you are not interested, I'm sure, in worrying about whether a Frankenstein's monster could be running loose around Technopark, decapitating the heads of CEOs. You're more concerned about what the implications are for your working life, for the prospects. And in fact, the Oxford Martin School came up with a study a year or so ago, which said that by 2030, 30% of the jobs in the world will be jobs that don't exist today. They simply don't exist today. So there's no way you can actually prepare for them or study for them, because you don't know what those jobs will be. Those jobs haven't been thought of yet. And yet 2030 is just 11 years away. All of you are going to be working in 2030, and you're going to be looking at a world in which 1/3 of the jobs are not jobs that you can imagine today or conceive of today. So what is that going to mean? It means, above all, I think, a tremendous adaptability, a tremendous capacity to be able to think out of the box, to think afresh, and to adapt to the new challenges that come our way. I'll give you an example of an industry that couldn't adapt and has collapsed, which was actually till very recently seen as a major success story of the era when, as Rishikesh described it, we had the business process outsourcing model, business process offshoring, where people could use the connections, the fiber optics, the satellite connections, to take advantage of lower cost technically equipped labor in countries like India. And that is the field of medical transcription. It was invented by Indians in the late 1990s, and the logic was very simple. An American doctor would see his patients during the day, would dictate his notes into a machine at night. The notes would be zinged overnight to India, where in the morning in India, a young Indian with sufficient medical training to have the vocabulary would listen to these notes and type up the notes. He would then zing them back to the American doctor when he went to sleep, and the next morning when the American doctor returned to his practice, he had all his notes typed up, ready to use. And that was seen as an absolute miracle. It saved the American doctor lots of time, and also saved the American doctor lots of money, because an American secretary cost far more than a battalion of Indians typing the stuff up for him. And one of the striking things about this was that India seized this opportunity, took advantage of connectivity, of the English language skills of its young people, and became a world leader in medical transcription. We had something like 90 to 95% of the global market. Initially it was 100%, thank you. But the Philippines, I think, started catching up. And for a while, many companies were thriving, their valuations were going up, they were hiring left, right, and center, because they thought, look at this is a sunrise industry. The sunrise lasted for a grand total of about a decade and a half. About 15 years, the industry began to collapse, and today, all but a handful of the medical transcription businesses around India have closed. Maybe they closed or had to take on a different kind of profession, because medical transcription, the bottom has dropped out of the market. Why is that? Very simple. We have had developments in voice recognition software, thanks to artificial intelligence, that a machine can rapidly learn the voice of the doctor, and the doctor now, for investment one time in one piece of software, can just speak into his computer in his own voice, and instead of sending the notes to India and waiting the next day, he sees all his notes coming up in real time on his own computer screen. So why does he need medical transcription? Why does he need to pay an Indian to do this? One-time expense on software and you're home. That's what's happening. So when you think about what is going on in the world today, it is actually very worrying for us. Another field we were very good at. Our radiologists are much, much, much less well paid than American radiologists, and America has a shortage of radiologists. So, staying in the medical field, they used to have a practice where the major American hospitals would actually send their x-rays digitally to India to be read by an Indian radiologist, whose reading and analysis would be sent back to the doctor in America. And this was again considered a sunrise business. It was going to keep growing, that people in India were going to be reading the x-rays and God knows what else radiologists read, MRI scans and all of that, of American patients, and doing the analysis in India, because there aren't enough trained radiologists to do it there, and they cost too much to do anyway. Again, what happened? Once again, artificial intelligence stepped in, and now machines, computers have been programmed to read, decipher, and interpret MRIs and X-rays with probably a greater degree of accuracy than human beings. I have a friend who tells me that the medical profession altogether could be under threat, because he says that thanks to artificial intelligence, all you have to do is to feed in to a software program vast numbers of cases, and a machine, a computer, will be able to diagnose an illness with a degree of specificity and a degree of accuracy that will not be available to any human doctor. A human doctor may have the experience of God knows doing 100 operations or seeing 1,000 patients. The machine could have actually had the case studies, the detailed case histories of 1 million patients, 10 million patients. Computer capacities, computing speeds are just absolutely expanding. And so, all that will be needed would be for you one day to give a drop of your blood or strap yourself to a machine that will take your various parameters, and the machine will tell you what is wrong with you and what medicines you need to take. You won't need a doctor anymore. Now again, this seems like fantasy, but I mention it to you merely to say how much and how rapidly the world of work is changing. Doctors, of course, are in no great danger, I think, of extinction, because amongst other things, the bedside manner of a robot or a machine is not likely to be comparable to the human touch. But it does mean that they will at least need to rely on the help of these devices. In other words, a doctor may see a patient with a set of symptoms, and rather than confidently saying, this is what you've got, with a 50-50 chance that he might be wrong the next week and new symptoms may emerge, he might be able to type in all these symptoms into a computer program and get a broader and more specific diagnosis of his own patient. So at the very least, using computer technology to assist what is otherwise seen as a specialized human skill is now very much within the realms of the possible. So, where do you all go from here? My simple answer, now you're all young working professionals. You've done your education, but of course life is a process of continuous learning. And all of you will certainly be learning on the job as you go along. And as new technologies come up, new techniques come up, new processes come up, new softwares are written, new inventions come into your field, you'll have to stay abreast of them. But beyond that, I would go back to our schools and I would urge them, stop teaching our children what to think, teach our children how to think. Ultimately, in today's world, we don't need a well-filled mind. The days when teachers would drill facts and figures and principles and theories into our head and we would mug them up and regurgitate them in the examinations, those days are over if they weren't already some time ago. They should have been, they are over now. Because in any case in the real world, once you leave that school and that exam hall, anything you want to find you can get with 2 clicks of the mouse or a press of an iPhone on your Google site. So what you need is not a well-filled mind, it's a well-formed mind. And what is a well-formed mind? A mind that knows how to think, not what to think. A mind that tells you, when you see an unfamiliar problem, how you might approach it. A mind that deals with unknown facts, unfamiliar, unknown facts, analyzes them as the capacity to absorb them and relate them to other bits of previous knowledge. A mind that is able essentially to deal with information, insights, challenges, synthesize them and work with them even if you've never come across them before. You know, Einstein is said to have said many decades ago that the mark of a truly educated mind is what's left behind in your head after you've forgotten everything you studied for your examinations. I'm probably paraphrasing a bit, but that's certainly my belief as well. I've forgotten most of in fact, I used to tend to forget most of what I learned for my examinations the day after I wrote the examinations. It didn't matter. It was a technique. It was just something to do to pass exams and go on to the next stage. We've got to stop behaving like that. We've got to be people for whom knowledge is not only a lifelong pursuit, but the manner in which we pursue that knowledge has got to be something far, far more adaptable, resilient, able to deal with unexpected developments and thereby take us into the rest of the 21st century. I want to thank you all for giving me a chance to address you. I'd be happy to take a couple of questions, but then I'm afraid I have to move on to the remaining parliamentary duties that occupy an MP here. A couple of bereaved homes of constituents and so on, so I can't stay too long. But if you've got a few questions, I'm happy to take them and respond. I wish you well, and I'm very glad that you are today thinking and talking in terms of how you must adjust, how you must move forward in this 21st century high-tech world. Thanks very much. Jay. So, any questions or comments? Yeah.
almost all the fields. How important or how can India cope up with it in a situation where still children in schools, the thinking process of the children are restricted to A for apple. So how can India cope up with this?
We do need to reform our educational system and our approaches to education. It's not going to be that every single child is going to be equipped to cope with the technology development of the 21st century. We know that's not possible because it's not in any society the reality. Every society has people who are more able to cope with these challenges than others. Every society will have people who, for reasons of their own personal aptitude, interest, or life choices, will not necessarily do that. But we should offer the choice, because in every school, in the humblest village school or slum school, there will be a child or 2 or 10 who actually have the kind of mind that can take advantage of these possibilities and move forward. And if the system exists to actually expose them to this possibility, discover, unearth these kids and move them on, we'll do better. And certainly the time has come for some real futuristic thinking in our education. Anyone on this side?
Sir.
Yeah.
This is a fun question. Sir, the tough words that you say during your talk, is it intentional or you want to make it more?
Sorry, which word?
Sir, the one which we started the program with. These
Oh,
are
that
words
was
we
just a
have never
joke.
heard of.
That was just a joke. No, I read widely and have had as a result a somewhat sort of overexpanded vocabulary, but I believe very much in communication. To be effective, people must understand what you're saying. So I hope that everything I said in my talk you understood. I normally speak that way, but partly because some words which I thought most people knew they didn't, and as a result there were reactions implying that I was using difficult words, I decided to make a joke of it and parody myself. And so once in a while I use a word just to make a larger point. So for example, when the Bihar Chief Minister left our alliance and switched over to the BJP-led alliance, I just said, word of the day, snollygoster, first used US 1848 definition, a shrewd, unprincipled politician, latest use today. And that's all I needed to say. I didn't need to even mention his name or what had happened. People got the message. Or more recently, when I wanted to announce the publication of my new book, The Paradoxical Prime Minister, I thought just announcing a book which might be seen as one more attack on Mr. Modi will not necessarily get much attention. So I said, let me use a word that will grab eyeballs. So that's why I said, my new book, The Paradoxical Prime Minister, is more than just a 500-page exercise in floxinosi nihilipilification. And that obviously got people talking. So I'm not just saying that he is worthless, I'm giving you a substantial argument or series of arguments in the book, and that's why you should read it. That's the message. But because of the word, people started talking, and now as I saw, what is it, 4 or 5 months later, 4 months later, I have the word coming up here today. I meet little children at weddings and so on who come up and say, floxinosi nihilipilification, great pride, because their parents have taught. So it's amusing. It's a momentary spasm in the culture that will pass. But while it's there, it's fun to do it. That's all. Nothing more. One of the issues I didn't. Yes, go ahead.
Sir,
Before your selfie.
could you pronounce the word, the fear of last words which you have used?
The fear of last words. Hippopotamonstrosesquipedaliophobia. So phobia is a fear. Sesquipedalian means using long words. Hippopotamonstro means particularly long words, gigantic long words. So you put them all together to get hippopotamonstrosesquipedaliophobia. That's what it is. Again, these are all frankly artificially made up words, partly because some other people at some point in the English language's evolution felt it would be amusing to create long words. So you had, for example, the word, I think floxinosi nihilipilification is at least 200 or 300 years old, but this one is more recent. And then there is kind of a fake word, which is technically the longest word in the English language, which is pneumono-ultrascopic micro-ultrascopic silicono-volcanicosis. Now, it's totally a made-up word because it refers to a particular illness, which is experienced by one person in 100 million or something, which comes from the inhalation of very fine particles of silicon dust. So there is actually a simpler word for it, which is silicosis. But people say if the silicon particles are especially fine, then they would be ultra microscopic. And therefore, they made a compound word which is only existing in medical dictionaries and which involves a condition that practically no one gets. And therefore, you can take it or leave it as you like. The most sort of now floxinol-C dehumidification is probably the best known word, but otherwise a commonly used very long word in the 19th century was the word anti-disestablishmentarianism. Now that is strictly, in many, many books you'll still find that as the longest word in the English language because it's a normal word. Establishmentarianism was a philosophy that said the state should have an established religion. So the religion of England is the Church of England, the Anglican Church, and that is established. In Denmark, when you pay taxes, a portion of your taxes goes to the Lutheran Church because it is the established religion of Denmark. So the establishmentarianism says you must have an established church. So those who are more secular minded and say there's no reason why the state should support any one church were called the disestablishmentarians because they wanted to disestablish the church in these countries. And those who said these secularists are betraying our tradition and culture, sort of the equivalent of the Sangh Parivar in those days, they were the anti-disestablishmentarians. So anti-disestablishmentarianism was a legitimate word. It wasn't a fake made-up word. It really deflected something. And that is, strictly speaking, the longest word in the English language. Listen, there's one more thing that I haven't addressed. So if nobody else has a question, I should address it. Anyone else? Okay.
What book are you reading currently? And would you recommend it to this audience?
I'm afraid I'm not, because what happened was that after I finished The Paradoxical Prime Minister, I had such a backlog to catch up of everything from press clippings to articles to matters involving studying the nuts and bolts of this government and its failings and so on, plus so much time now being spent in preparing for elections that the days are already 18 hours long and I haven't dared to pick up a book. On 2 flights, as I used to read on flights, I carried books with me. Found I didn't have time to open them, so I've stopped carrying the books now because it's easier and lighter to just carry newspaper clippings and finish those off to get a sense of what people think about the issues that matter in the world. Now, the other issue I wanted to raise was the question of academia-industry interface, which I gather you're also discussing here. I'm very much a believer in the importance of connecting the academic world to the real world. In fact, during my brief stint in the Human Resources Development Ministry, we passed a rule that no polytechnic will be authorized in this country unless it has an undertaking or a relationship with an industry within a 30-kilometer radius. Because you have absolutely useless polytechnics around the country, full of teachers teaching from 40-year-old textbooks, things that they learned when they were students 30 years ago, and that bear no relation to the real world of industry. And very often people graduating from such institutions don't get hired, or if they are hired, they have to be retrained from scratch because nothing they've learned is relevant. So what I've said is now there must be a direct connection to industry. Narayan Murthy, the founder of Infosys, actually did a report for us, which sadly has been gathering dust under the present government, recommending specific methods of academia-industry interface, which, as you know, is very common in many Western countries. So, for example, in America, it is quite typical of a company to come up with an idea, go to a university, especially a good university, and say, if you've got graduate students or PhD scholars who are willing and interested to research this particular thing, we will stake you, we'll give you the necessary funding for that research, and whatever they come up with and produce, we will patent and we'll jointly own, we'll give you some royalties for it, etc. Now, what's the advantage of that? The university actually gets some money to finance its own research. The students get hands-on training and experience. They deal with real-world problems that have applications. A profit motivation is a dirty word, and the industry has no place on a university campus. We should be saying, on the contrary, you can strengthen university campuses by putting more money into them. And that's one of the things that I hope we will be able to move towards in a constructive new direction after the elections of 2019. So that's the only political statement I'm leaving you with. It really has been a pleasure seeing you all, interacting with you. I do have to move on. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.